Our last guest was telling students how fortunate they are in a college environment to have such prestigious guests, Canadian authors who are published writers, who can come and talk to you about their craft and perhaps enlighten and inspire you to do your own writing and some of the things that you will go on to do that are also very creative and very important. So I want to tell you a little bit about Michael Winter before he comes up to the front. He has written 5 novels and 2 collections of short stories. His first novel, This All Happened, published in 2000, won the inaugural Winterset Award. Wasn't named after you, was it? Winterset? And was nominated for the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. The Big Y in 2004 was then chosen as one of the top 100 books of 2004 by the Globe and Mail. Selected as an editor's pick for Amazon.ca's 25 literary books of the year worldwide, and shortlisted for both the Trillium Award and the Thomas Radel, okay, sorry, Atlantic Fiction Award. The Architects Are Here 2007 was shortlisted for the Giller Prize. And I don't know if you are aware, but Michael has also been a juror for the Giller Prize. It's a very important prize for those not in the know. It's also funded by Scotiabank in part, and it's a $50,000 literary prize for those who win it. It's a lot of money. So a work of documentary fiction entitled The Death of Donna Whalen in 2010 was shortlisted for the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. His fiction has won the CBC Literary Prize and appeared in The Walrus, in the annual Best Canadian Stories, and has been broadcast nationally on CBC Radio. In 2008, he was presented with the Writers Trust Notable Author Award in honor of his body of work. Mr. Winter grew up in Newfoundland. Am I saying that right? In Newfoundland, now lives in Toronto, and part-time he goes back and forth between both of these places. He's been on faculty with the Banff May Studios, has taught with the University of New Orleans summer program, and also in Madrid, Spain, and been a juror, as I said, for the Giller Prize. His latest novel, Minister Without Portfolio, was reviewed by the National Post last August and called a masterful examination of the very marrow of life. And I see it here, and I imagine you're going to be reading a little bit from that, perhaps. So, those of you who look up this information online, because I did send it out to your various professors, some of you are writing a little assignment about this. You can also find a lot of material, including an interview with Michael on the internet. And he has something interesting to say, an interesting metaphor about the internet and how it is a constant distractor for those of you with laptops. So if while he's reading, I would recommend that you close those down, so that you can take notes, but it's only polite when we have a guest that you do that. So finally, he was the Jack McClellan Writer-in-Residence at the University of Toronto during the 2011-2012 session. And he is here today, and we're very grateful that you are. It's such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
Okay, so I've written a few books. Grew up in Newfoundland. I'm not from Newfoundland though. My parents are from England, from Newcastle. My father met my mother at a dance in the north of England, and he said to her, I have a dog that can open doors with its teeth. And so they got together. And my father is like, in England, there's no, everything is private property. And my father worked in a shipyard, and didn't have much money. And he wanted to hunt and fish. He wanted to be like a cowboy. He loved the music of Hank Williams. And he said one time, like, what would you think about like moving to North America someplace? And my mother said, that she had always kind of harbored a feeling of like living in New York City. So she was kind of like open to it. And so they moved to Corner Brook, Newfoundland. So that's the kind of compromise that married couples make. So when they moved there, my father found friends who would take him hunting and fishing, and he went off salmon fishing with Mr. Penny, the next door neighbor, once. And that night he didn't come home. So my mother called the police. And I remember, like I was about 6 years old, my father coming to the front door at around 2 o'clock in the morning with these 2 police officers. And my father shook their hands, said goodnight to them, and he turned to my mother and said, "Anne, next time, wait 3 days." And that was all I was said about it. And we used to tie our own artificial flies. Like you know, when you're salmon fishing on the rivers, you don't use bait. You use a hook with feathers and bits of wool tied around with hackles and things. And my father used to tie these flies in a little vise in the basement, and I used to stand on the basement cement floor and watch my father tie these flies. Now, tying flies, I've done it since, and it's tying a fly is excruciatingly boring to do that. But just for a moment, imagine yourself as being an 8-year-old boy watching somebody tie flies. That's the kind of boy I was. Anyway, he used to tell me stories of, like, you know, living in England, and wild, crazy stories of things he did as when he was a kid. And then one day he told me this story, because after the salmon incident, there had been another one. He'd gone off moose hunting with Mr. Penny again, and my mother had waited, you know, one night, and he didn't come home, and 2, and on the 3rd night of him being overdue, she was just about to call the cops, and my father walked in the door, and he never told anybody about what had happened. But while he tied these flies, he told me. He said they were in this open boat. We were building a cabin on a lake, but for some reason, I think it's because my parents are English, but my father wanted to build a log cabin, but unlike any other log cabin I've ever seen, instead of like putting the logs horizontal, he wanted them vertical. He said, because that's kind of the way the tree is in nature, and you know, he wanted, you know, if it rained, the rain would go down the trunk of the tree that way, and it would preserve better that way. So we spent like 6 years building this log cabin. We cut down the trees, all this stuff, peeled the logs, all that. Anyway, from this cabin, which hadn't been built yet, my father and Mr. Penny had gone in an open boat up the lake, Grand Lake. It's the largest lake in Newfoundland, to the area where they could hunt moose. They shot a moose, they gutted it, they quartered it, put it in the boat, and they were coming back down the lake. And a wind picked up, and it got really stormy, and they capsized, and they both went in the water. And my father went down, and he was trying to swim up to the surface, but something was pulling him down. And he realized it was the anchor rope. The anchor had twisted around his body, and the weight of the anchor was pulling him down, and he realized that was it. He was going to drown with this anchor around him. Until Mr. Penny came down and pulled him and unwound him from the anchor rope and pulled him to the surface, and then they got to shore on Glover Island, which is this big island in Grand Lake. And I remember my father telling me about Glover Island. He said on Glover Island there's this little pond, and on that pond there's a little island. And someday, son, I want to take you there and camp on that little island that's on a pond, that's on an island, that's on a lake, that's on an island, that's in the sea. There's no other place on the planet like that. And that was where my father was, shipwrecked on this island with Mr. Penny. They flipped over the boat. There was still a quarter of a moose left in the boat from the air pocket, so all was not lost. And they came home out of it 3 days late. And he told me the story as he was tying flies in the basement, and he hadn't told my mother the story. And I just remember, you know, as an 8-year-old, hearing the story and thinking, wow, like an anchor. An anchor, the thing that you think of as giving you purchase giving you safety, something to throw over in a time of a storm, you know, to save you, is the very thing that's causing you to drown. And I think that was the first sort of image or a metaphor or a symbol that I could experience, that I knew that would make a good story. And that's, you could hang a story around that. I tried writing that story, and it's hard sometimes writing from truth. You know, truth is stranger than fiction, they say. I think Byron said that. And it's true. It's like something's, you know, I say to you now, and it's kind of like a good story, but as soon as it turns into text on a page, the reader sort of yawns and thinks, well, you know, I can't believe that. I'm not interested in that story. I don't believe it. You know, believing it. I used to write about my brother all the time. My brother's a car mechanic, and he's bigger than me. He's older than me and bigger than me. He was always older and bigger than me. And he always used to beat me up, and I always thought, someday I'm going to be bigger than you and I'm going to beat you up. And he's 6'5", he's 250 pounds, big guy. Anyway, I used to write about him because he's a really interesting character. And one day, but he never knew that I wrote about him. But one day he came to me. He said, Mike, I read your book of stories, you know, the ones that are all about me. He said he didn't know about it, but a buddy of his at the mechanic shop said, Paul, if you read your brother's book, you should, because it's all about you. And so he got it from the library and read it. And he said, I'm hurt. And I said, Paul, I was very nervous. I said, you know, like, what have you heard about? I said, is it about the time when you broke up with Lisa Staples and she was so upset that she slept with your younger brother? And he said, no. He said, no, I wasn't. He said, I didn't know about that, but you know, I wasn't hurt. I said, okay, was it the time when, like, all that summer, you and Tony Pinn and the boys were like planning to rob the Co-op grocery bank that's above the Co-op grocery store in Corner Brook, but because you're 6'5" and 250 pounds, even with like a stocking over your head, everybody would know who you were, so you never did it. And he said, no, he said, actually I love that story. Like, I'd forgotten entirely about that summer and those boys, and I was really enjoyed reading that story. So I said, Paul, what was it that hurt you? What did I write to make your feelings hurt? He said, Mike, I picked you up in the truck, and I had the dog in the cab of the truck with me. And you got in, and we were driving down the road, and we came to a stop sign, and I stopped, and the dog's snout, while I stopped the truck, sort of touched the windshield, and left a little snout mark on the windshield. And you wrote that there was a, and then he said, and there was a series of snout marks on the windshield. Mike, that betrays a trust. That goes over the line. And he was really upset that I'd written about his dog in that way. And it just made me realize that when you're working with a real experience, you know, writing from your own life, you will never know what is the thing that you write about that will hurt someone's feelings. When we were kids, well, you know, we were teenagers, me and my brother, and we were building that cabin, that log cabin, and part of what we had to do was cut down these trees that were in the back of the cabin, and we were doing this all one summer. My father had to go back to town or something, so he left my brother in charge, and we had to cut the trees down, limb the branches off the trees with an axe. That was my job. My brother's was to cut the tree down with a chainsaw, and then drag all the branches to a bonfire and burn the branches, and then, you know, drag the logs out to the road where they're going to get peeled to use in the log cabin. Anyway, it's really hot. It's July, beautiful weather. And as soon as my father left, my brother said, okay, Mike, things are going to change around here. He said, from now on, we're not like dragging all the branches down to that bonfire. Like, we'll make a couple fires, okay? Like, as soon as I knock down the tree, you limb it, throw the branches there, we'll set them on fire, we'll continue, we'll make it a lot faster. So we started doing that, and we had like 3 or 4 little fires where I was putting the branches in. We were really hot. We went back down to the foundation, so where the cabin was going to be. Like we had a little cement foundation, a little footing made, and we had like a little camper trailer there that we were sleeping in. And my father had left us like you can get like vinegar in like a big sort of 6-liter, container, and that was emptied, and there was like tap water from our house in Corner Brook in it. That was what we had to drink out of this big vinegar bottle, this warm tap water. And we were slugging that back. And through the trees, we could see the next door neighbors, the Pennies. They had built a cabin too, but they kind of built like a prefab cabin that, it had gone up in a weekend. They had their cabin up. And they were just swimming and larking around the lake, and they were like pulling individual cans of Coke out of the lake and opening them and guzzling them. Cold, ice cold cans of Coke. And there was Sharon Penny, who was the oldest. She was like about 22. I was like 14, my brother was about 17. And she was like asleep on an air mattress on the lake in a bikini with like a novel open on her thigh. And we were just knocking back the hot tap water, looking at Sharon Penny. And then my brother said, okay, we've got to go back to work. So we went back up to the woods. The first thing we saw on the road were these couple of these grouse. They're like a partridge, ptarmigan kind of bird. And they were on the road, and they were kind of dazed, and they were fluttering their feathers, and smoke was kind of coming off their feathers. I was like, what's going on with those guys? And then we looked into the woods where our work was being done, and like where the bonfires were before, they were kind of like, there was like a kind of a general train of smoke that was coming out of the woods in places where it shouldn't have been coming up. So we ran up, and we had these 2 like 5-gallon buckets of emergency water from the lake, for any kind of problems with the fire. And we sort of threw those 2 buckets of water onto this huge fire that was raging through the trees. And that was it. And the fire just kept going. And my brother looked at me and he said, Mike, I'm going to have to go to the Pennies, see if Mr. Penny's there, and get help. If he's not there, I'm going to have to run out to the main road, flag down a car, and go into Howley to call up wildlife and have a pumper truck driven out here to put this out. You stay here. So he took off. I was watching him running over the hill towards the Pennies, and I just turned one of those white buckets over and I sat on it, and I just watched this fire. And the wind was picking up, and it was one of those fires that just raced through the caribou moss, this dry moss, and racing up the trunks of these trees, and the top of the tree would just explode into flame, and the tree would kind of perish, and then the fire would race off to the next one. And it was just acres of forest that was on fire now. And I looked up on the hill and I saw this figure. It was Sharon Penny. She had come down, she had kind of put on a checked shirt over her bikini, and she was wearing cowboy boots. She still had the novel. She kind of sauntered down off the hill, walked towards me, kind of came up beside me. Sort of her elbow sort of touched my elbow. And she said, I hadn't said a word to Sharon Penny in my life. She said, you guys, you've really done it this time. And so we just watched this fire, and she was there kind of, I was just 14, she was 22. She just knew that I needed, help and some kind of reassurance that everything was going to be okay. And so we watched this, and then kind of out of the fire, there was this kind of sound, this kind of low, warbling sound. And then slowly out of the smoke was this big, yellow, fat, slow plane with these pontoons on the bottom. And it kind of just slowly came over us and made this arc and disappeared and landed on the lake and came back up again. And just as it came over a second time, this sort of, we're both looking at this confetti, it looked like. It was like, big kind of sprinkling of confetti coming out of the bottom of it. And then I saw my brother on the hill, the silhouette of my brother. And he'd been running for like an hour back and forth. And he was catching his breath on the top of the hill, his hands on his knees, and then he cupped his hands to his mouth and he just said one word. He said, "Run!" And it was too late. And me and Sharon Penny were hit with 8 tons of water from this plane. And I was crushed into the earth with Sharon Penny on top of me. And it was fantastic. And I just remember my brother coming and tearing Sharon off me and shaking me and saying, Mike, are you all right? And I remember Sharon just saying, "That was fucking amazing." Anyway, that's another like true story that I've tried to write. It's a really hard story to write. And but I'm perplexed at these things of like how do you write down true things? How do you make them interesting to a reader who knows nothing of your life? One thing I figured out, this gets to like a technical issue of writing, is I keep a notebook all the time. If you want to write, it's really important to have like a little notebook. And I'm not talking about these like if you ever say to somebody in your family, you humbly say, you confess, I'd like to write. You know what you'll get under the Christmas tree? You'll get this moleskin notebook. It's like a little black leather-bound book, beautiful, full of blank pages, and like Bruce Chatwin used to write in them. And there's a whole tradition of the moleskin notebook. And it's incredible. They're gorgeous. Those are really bad for writers. And the reason is that you'll be walking down the street, you'll see something, and you'll think, oh, I should write that down. And you'll dig in your bag, you'll pull out the moleskin notebook, you'll open it up, and the beauty of the pages, the leather-bound heritage of Bruce Chatwin, you'll just think, I should be sitting down so that my writing is a little better. I shouldn't be standing up trying to write this on the bus or something. And also, the thought I'm having isn't really a good one. Like it's not as good as it could be. If I just wait a little while, the better words will crystallize, and then I'll write the better, description of it in the book. I'll wait, and so you end up not writing in the book. So I'll show you the little book I have. Here, that's the book I have. It's a, I don't know if you can see from here, but it's a CIBC passbook for the ATM machines. Like people of my generation, not even of my generation. I'm one of the few people who actually prints out their, account balance in a little book at the ATM machine. Anyway, these are free, and they're a sewn signature. Like they're really tough. And I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't take it. I didn't unzip a bag and take out a book. I have it in my back pocket. See right here, right there. Just have it like that. Because what happens is I'm talking to somebody at a party or at the bus stop or anywhere, and they say something, and I go, oh yeah, that's really good. I'll be back just a sec. And I take it out and I write it down. I write it down right there and then. Because you know what? If you're going to be a writer, you will talk to somebody and they'll tell you something really fascinating or funny or something like that, and you'll think, okay, I'm going to remember that tonight. When I get home tonight, I'll write that down. You try and remember that when you get home. You won't. You'll remember like a version of it, a vague generality of it, or you'll forget it. Or you'll only remember 3 of the 7 really good stories of the day, and you'll have forgotten 4 of them. The other thing that happens is this, like even when you're using a little notebook like this, is like I saw a man crossing the street, and he had his arms folded, and his arms were barking. And then I saw a little set of ears, right? And so I took out my book, because I was kind of nice, there was a man with a dog in his arms, and he was crossing the street, and the dog started to bark, right? Well, that's not what happened. That's seeing the world with hindsight. That's exactly what did happen. But my first experience of the world was I saw a man crossing the streets with his arms folded, and his arms started to bark. That's what I saw. His arms were barking. And then I saw a little set of ears. Now, if I write that down, what does the reader do? The reader goes, his arms are barking? Oh, there's a set of ears. Oh, he's got a dog. I didn't write the word dog. You supplied it. You are engaged with the reading of the story. I've got you now. You're there discovering the world with my protagonist. My narrator is telling you things, but the narrator is saying, I haven't quite figured out the world. Come with me. Now, as a writer, after I've written 8 pages of a story or a chapter of the novel, I know very well what the mystery is. I have answered things in the chapter. So to come back to page 1 and say, I'm perplexed about this thing. I've got to go talk to my mother about this thing because maybe she has the answer. You know, on page 8 I've written the answer already, so it's false for my narrator to say that. But I have to have it that way in order to have the reader turn the page. This is how you engage your reader, and how every day I have to remember that hindsight is what kills drama. Hindsight is the death of drama. And the big trick is to always write without knowing the end of your story. Yeah, it's a novel here. I guess I could read something out of it. I won't though. Let's see. Like sometimes people say, well, what's your novel about? Some people here are going to summarize what the lecturer is saying today. And like the thing is, I really don't know what the book is about. I really don't know, but I'll tell you what. There's a scene here where the narrator is he's just bought a house, an old house that belongs to a friend of his who was killed, and he feels partly responsible. He's bought the house. It's the middle of winter. He finds this little river in the back that's frozen over, and he's standing on the river looking at the house. And all the ice is clear. You can look through. You can see like the rushes underneath the water, like underneath the kind of the water coursing through. And just like that, he sees a beaver pass under his feet on the frozen river. And somehow I think, if a book can be about anything, it's about that. It's about standing on a river and there's another world under your feet going on past you, right there, that's completely unexpected. Who would expect to see it? Now, a friend of mine told me this. I didn't experience that directly, but a friend told me that happened to him once when he was a kid, walking to school on a river, a frozen river. He saw the torso of a beaver just flash underneath his feet. I thought, what a fantastic image. I mean, what does that image mean? What does it mean? Who knows what it means? But there's something there of the duality of this is experience and yet this is happening. And yets are really important. Like when you're writing, it's really hard not to think, I have an agenda. You know, when you write an essay, you know, you have an agenda, right? Like, I'm going to explore and illuminate something of a social issue or something like this. Or my research will explain these certain things and I will convince the reader that this is true. That's an agenda. In fiction, you can't have agendas. Of course, you do have an agenda. You just can't let the reader know your agenda. And the great thing about fiction is you can have like a sonnet, okay? The structure of a sonnet. I forget how many lines a sonnet is, but let's say it's 12. The first 10 lines of a sonnet or so, 14, okay. The majority of the sonnet says, the world is this way. It is full of buds of life and flowers and puppy dogs and eggs hatching. That's the first 12 lines. In the last 2 lines it says, and yet there's death. Okay, that's a sonnet. Okay? The sonnet has an and yet. And every paragraph in a novel should have an and yet, or every page. It should say the protagonist could say, my favorite color is black. I love black. I love everything about black. I always have and always will. Except my mother gave me a piece of paper It was just a white sheet of paper, and it was so beautiful, this piece of paper. I don't know if it was the shape of it, the color of it, but it made me think about white. And after a while, I realized that white was my favorite color. It had become my favorite color. Now you can look at that paragraph and say, oh my goodness, this is a contradiction. First he says black is his favorite color, now he's saying white is his favorite color. You can't trust this narrator. I'm not going to read this anymore. He doesn't know where he's... You don't think that. What you think is, wow, I'm in the presence of somebody here trying to figure out something. Trying to figure out his favorite color. Have you read this story? It's about somebody trying to figure out his favorite color. It's fascinating. You should read the story. It's great. You know, you listen to yourself and you think, how ridiculous. But that's it. What you're doing is you're not really discounting or contradicting the love of black. You've just doubled the power of the scene by saying, I love life, and yet I love death. Or they're both here. What am I going to do? This gets into another technical thing, which is structure and promises. Promises are really good in fiction. You could do this, okay? You can write a first draft of a story. You can say, I got up this morning, and I brushed my teeth, and I went out and had breakfast, and my mother said there was no milk, so I had to go get some milk. And then I came back and ate my breakfast, and then on the way to school, I shot some hoops with my buddy, and then we went to school, and then just after lunch, we killed the gym teacher. Okay? Because something's got to happen, right? There's going to be a change, right? We all know that. So, like, that's a good story. I'll read that story. It's an episodic narrative to a conclusion, which is, you know, a change in the world. Or you could do this. Draft 2. I woke up, and I remembered that today was the day we were going to kill the gym teacher. Now that's interesting. Wow, wow. Now, I'm going to watch my narrator brush his teeth. I'm going to watch him have his breakfast, you know, because something's going to go down. The gym teacher is going to get killed, and I will wait for it. I will wait for your beautiful descriptions of breakfast and your teeth brushing, because the gym teacher is going to get killed. Now that's just the one thing. Now you do this, you say, there was no milk, so I had to go get milk from my mother. But on the way, my buddy Jeff said, you want to shoot some hoops? I gotta go get milk from my mom. Oh, come on, shoot some hoops. All right, all right. And so I went and shot some hoops. Now the reader's thinking, okay, what's going on here? He's supposed to be getting milk for his mother, but he's off shooting hoops with his buddy Jeff. Like, what's going on here? Is he going to get the milk? Is he going to get the milk? And you turn the page, and then he says, you know, well, that was great. It was a really good game of 21s. Really enjoyed that. But I got to get Mom the milk. Ah, oh, he remembered the milk. That's great. He's got to get the milk. Oh, man, I was worried there. I thought he was going to forget about the milk. He gets the milk, and then he goes to school, and then he gets to his buddy Jeff, who we've seen prior playing basketball with, right? Jeff. And Jeff says, you know what? Gym teacher's a pretty good guy. We don't need to kill him. Let's let him go. All right, okay, you're right. End of story. Now you read that story, and you're going to go to your friend and say, have you read this story? It's all about, like, they're going to kill the gym teacher, and he's trying to get the milk, but he doesn't get the milk, and then you realize, actually nothing happens in this story, nothing. But it feels gripping, like it feels like on every turn something bad is going to happen, but nothing ever does. Well, how do they do that? Promises. It's all about promises and delay. So you're breaking up the episodic, this happened, and that happened, and that happened, by just inserting earlier the promise of something to happen. And then that promise doesn't have to happen, but you've infected the entire story with that drama. Nice little tricks to do. Hard to do in a first draft. You know, this is stuff you go and rewrite. Those things happen. Any questions out there? I got, you know, I can ramble on, but I can take questions too. Should I take questions, Ingrid?
Yes.
Okay. Who's got a question? I'll answer. There's no stupid questions either. Like every day I wonder like what I'm doing. Like I don't do anything else except write fiction. That's all I do. I make a living doing this. I can't believe it. But I do. But every day I can't believe it, and I'm doubtful. Yes.
How long did it take you to write your first novel?
Okay, my first novel, well, my first book, it took me 5 years. I wrote the book, it took me 5 years. I gave it to my mother, because my mother is a very good reader, and she read the novel, and I asked her, you know, what she thought of it. It took me 5 years. She said, "Oh, Michael, it was a very nice book. You know, I didn't realize that you could go into a public washroom, and those hand dryers, that you dry your hands, I didn't know you could turn up the nozzle and blow dry your face. I didn't know that." So that's what she took from my first book. 5 years of writing, that's what she learned. So, yeah. So I'm sort of the belief that, you know, writers are different, right? A lot of different kinds of writers out there. But for me, I sort of believe that everything that I think is interesting over the course of 5 years should find its way into the book. That my book isn't about one thing. The book is about everything that I consider interesting, and I trust, my faith is that somehow the narrative will have a kind of a tissue running through it, which, because of the way my mind works, if I can communicate that to you, it will all cohere. Instead of it all feeling like disparate bits that have no point, it'll all feel like I've just experienced a life reading this book. It's full of the things. I guess one of the main things I truly believe is that every single person on the planet is capable of thinking everything. That's sort of something I believe about character. I don't really think that characters are like, okay, that person only has these sets of thoughts, and this person has another set of thoughts. And I think it's really great to give characters contradictory opinions on things, the same character. The reader is waiting to make sense of a book. The reader will not feel like these things are errors or flaws or things which don't make sense. The reader will go, "Oh yeah, I know that kind of person." I have a friend, Mark Jarman, who wrote he's a great fiction writer, but he also wrote a memoir of his family called Ireland's Eye. It was all about his Irish ancestors, and there's a great scene in there with Mark and his mother. And I asked Mark about it one time. I said, because I told you a few things about me and my brother, and I said, "What did your mother think when she read that story?" He said, "Oh, I don't think my mother's read it, but," I said, "Well, how did you remember that scene?" Because it's like a childhood scene, you know? He said, "Oh, I was on a bus in Guatemala, and I saw this woman talking to her son, and the way she talked to her son was exactly the way my mother used to talk to me." So I just wrote down what they said, and I gave it to myself and my mother to say. Memoir, non-fiction. I was blown away. But then I thought of Hemingway's memoir, A Movable Feast. This is a book he wrote at the end of his life about being a young man in Paris. And he says, I went into a cafe, and I sat down, I got my pencils out, and I was writing about a story about being a boy up in Michigan. And I needed to describe the weather. And who can remember what the weather was like when you were a kid? But I looked out into the Paris street and it was raining. So I made it rain in Michigan when I was a kid. He says it's called transference. You just take sensory information from one place and you apply it to another. And this is important with all sorts of writing. And what's really neat about that is to remember that he wrote that book, in his late 50s in the Florida Keys, about his time when he was a young man in Paris, about writing about being a boy up in Michigan. So maybe it was a rainy day in Florida when he wrote that scene. But those are the kinds of things that fiction writers, all kinds of writers do all the time. Any other questions out there? You can stick your hand up. Yes, yes.
I heard a guy on CBC a few months ago talking about falling into a garbage incinerator and almost burning to death. Was that you?
I've heard that guy talk about falling into an incinerator. Yeah, that was me. Yeah, that was me.
I was wondering how that experience affected your writing, or your life after you survived? And are you okay?
So I bought a little house in Newfoundland. I bought it's an Ocean View house, 100 years old. I bought it for $5,000. I'd won like a little prize. It was $5,000, so I thought, okay, I'll buy the house with the money. And thought it's an acre of land, a house. How can you go wrong? So my father saw it and he said, well, you usually get what you pay for. And it's true, it's probably worth about $5,000, not a penny more. But the roof was leaking, so I had to, shovel off the roof and bring it to the garbage dump. And a buddy of mine who works on the Hibernia rigs, big burly guy, said, well, Mike, when you go to the dump with your roofing materials, they'll tell you to put that in the incinerator. And if I were you, like wear a mask or something, because that stuff, the pollution that comes off that's bad. You think about me, like the delicate writer, it's like, okay, Wayne, it's all right. So I went out there, and this incinerator, it's 3 stories tall, sheet metal, thick metal, 3/4-inch metal. It's like a Mad Max movie of things burning inside this incinerator, and there's a ramp, and I had to back the truck up to the top of the incinerator and throw the shingles into this mouth. And as I was throwing in the shingles, I could see them falling into the incinerator and where the flames were, and halfway down they were bursting into flames and then rising on the heat and coming back and landing in the truck. And I was catching the truck on fire, so I thought, this is not a good idea. It's not a good place. What am I going to do here? And I saw this big sheet of shingles at the bottom, underneath everything. I thought, well, if I just pull and slip everything in with one big movement, it'll all slip into the incinerator at once. I can jump into the truck and gun it out of there. So that's what I tried to do. But as it was very heavy, I was pulling like this, and it tore. The shingles tore, and my momentum carried me into the mouth of the incinerator. And they make those openings very flush because dump trucks go up there and dump the stuff. They don't want anything snagging on the side. So I was like in the incinerator trying to find a place to hold on to, and I couldn't. I fell in. And I thought my life was over because you fall into an incinerator and that's it. And but I landed on the flames, and then something in me jumped off, and then I went right down to the bottom. So it's kind of like a bell-shaped incinerator, and I'd fallen in, landed on top of the pyre of flame, and then jumped down to the bottom where there was kind of like a little alcove there of ash, and all the heat was rising in front of me, and I was alive inside the incinerator. I couldn't believe it. I was laughing. Who's alive inside of an incinerator? And I'd seen 2 guys in a truck parked where you drop off the stoves and fridges. And I looked for a way out. There was no way out, so I started yelling for them. And eventually, to cut a long story short, they opened up a square of light, and I saw the silhouette of 2 men peer in. And I just ran around the perimeter and out. And as they said later, buddy, you just kept on running. I just ran until I hit the trees. And I turned around, my shoes were off my feet because my shoelaces had vanished in the heat, and I was saved by these 2 guys. Anyway, the next day I called them up. This one guy, I got his name out of the phone book, and he said, "Who's this?" I said, "I'm the guy that fell into the incinerator." He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I just wanted to call again and thank you for saving my life." He said, "That's no trouble, but it's all the same to you. Don't call here again." And I hung up, and I talked to my friend whose aunt lives in the town that he's from. And his aunt said, "Oh, that guy, he's an alcoholic. And he goes off to places like the dump with a buddy to have a drink. But if his wife finds out about it, he's going to be in trouble. So he's like the local hero who can't tell anybody that he saved my life. I can't tell anybody that." So it altered my life only in that I'd gone through a long time of just being an artist who thought, I don't make enough money to have a family. Like I don't want to have kids in poverty, sort of thing. And but all my friends in Newfoundland have tons of kids, and it just made me get off the pot and have a kid. So that's what happened. I was with my partner, and we just had a baby. That's how it changed my life. That's the best thing I've ever done. How's that?
Well,
Okay. Oh,
Unfortunately, it's 10:02.
jeez, look at that.
Ah, no, and this is wonderful. I want you to tell them what you said in an interview we were talking about at lunch about the puppy and the internet and the dead dog.
Oh yeah, well, somebody was asking about writing and stuff, and you know, everybody asks, you know, how do you write? And I write on a computer. I don't mind writing on a computer, but I turn the airport, the Wi-Fi off, and I write on a dead computer because just imagine you're in a room, or you're in a house, and you open up one door, and there's a little puppy dancing around, and then you open up another door to another room, and there's a dead dog in there, and that dog has been dead for 3 days, and you open up the door, and just the smell of that dog, and you just shut the door. Now, tell me, which room are you going to go into? You're going to go into the room with the puppy, play with the puppy. Well, that puppy is the internet. Okay? That's it. And you don't need that puppy in the room because your novel is the dead dog. Okay? You don't need the temptation of the puppy. You got to go in there and you got to take that maggoty muzzle of a dog's mouth and blow life into that body, that stench of body. That's what rewriting a book is all. It's breathing life into a corpse. How's that, Ingrid?
It's so perfect. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for coming. This is wonderful. Thank you.